Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa. Welcome back to the Better Sex Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for spending some time with me. Today I'm going to talk about something that my guest suggested to me, actually. Sometimes I seek out particular topics. Other times people approach me with ideas. And in Heather's case, she wanted to talk about what it means to be sex positive, which, maybe is a phrase you've heard. I feel like that's coming into our culture more. As she and I talk about it, it's on my website. It's on her website. I think sex therapists use it. But I think maybe it's in the general public. It's coming into awareness. And so we're going to talk about what does sex positive even mean? And then maybe more importantly, what's the opposite of that? Sex negative, sex negativity. The burden of shame and judgment and self-doubt and self-consciousness and the kinds of ways people can experience the burdens of that. I feel like we get saddled with this messaging and we integrate it. We kind of take it on without thought. Usually it just sort of goes in and then here's our burden when we get into a relationship when we want to be sexual. And it's like, oh, we've got barriers in our way. We've got things that limit our freedom, our enjoyment, our sense of ourselves, the way we want to express ourselves. I think it's a really, really important topic. So Heather Shannon is my guest. She's a therapist in Chicago. She did the same sex therapy training that I did. I think that's how we got connected. And we're going to talk about what it means to be sex positive, what it means to be sex negative, and how do you go between the two? How do you become sex positive, right? Safe place to be yourself, to be sexual with your partner. So I hope you enjoy it. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So, Heather, thanks so much for being on the show with me.
Thank you, Jessa. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's going to be fun. This is a cool topic because I use the word sex positive. I mean, it's even on my website, and it's a concept that I think about, but I've not had anybody on the show about it. And I haven't really thought about how would I define, sex positive. And of course, the opposite, sex negative, which is
right.
Of course, shows up for our clients a lot. Right. So how do you even define those to start with?
I don't know. That's a good question. So when I think, and I had part of what inspired me to talk about this too, is that I had someone who was helping me with digital marketing see it on my website and say, well, what do you mean sex positive? Like, what is that even getting at? And I was like, oh, is this like an industry jargon that I didn't even realize was a jargon? For me, when I hear sex positive, I kind of think of the word freedom, to be honest. And I think maybe more of a little technical definition could be kind of the idea that if something is between two consenting adults, that it's all good, to kind of simplify it. So I think with like sex negativity, I think of more like stigma and shame and judgment and, this is good and this is not good, kind of those labeling tendencies.
Right. I even think, I know this isn't, I think you're right that the word is used in our industry, sex positive, is anything goes between two consenting adults, But I even think at a more basic level, like people feel positively about sex, like it's a good thing, meant to be enjoyed and a positive part of life, or it's even, so many people have been taught somehow or have embodied this idea that sex is a negative thing. It's shameful, it's scary, it's dangerous, it's risky, it's fraud.
Yeah. And that makes me feel sad.
Yeah, I know, me too.
I think it's probably a big part of, I'm guessing, why both of us chose this profession.
Right.
And I think, for me, it was like seeing clients coming in before I even decided to become a sex therapist, and that there was just like a lot of shame and stigma. And so I think just as a therapist in general, it was kind of like, okay, let me help you sort of like explore these like dark corners of the psyche and like shine some light on it and kind of send the message like, hey, this is okay. Like whoever you are, however you express that is okay.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about how this shows up in our culture? I mean, on our website, it's
so many
positive,
thoughts.
But yeah, okay. So jump off wherever you want there.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been thinking also about racism being such a hot topic lately, and that some of the sex negativity, I think, is it could be fetishizing people of color. It could be sexist practices. It could even just be like assumptions. What are assumptions we make about sex? Even the idea that sex ends when the man orgasms. It's like that. It's like, is that really a sex positive idea, or is that kind of a limiting belief here that we've kind of been fed? So I think looking at that.
Well, gosh, even the idea inherent in that statement of when the man orgasms, like assuming there'd be a man in this, or there'd be a man and a woman,
right?
Like heteronormativity, like all of it,
Yes, yes, and I think that not only does it harms everyone. That's kind of my point. It harms everyone when we have these kind of assumptions that we're taught, and that sex is heterosexual. Sex is over when the man ejaculates, that all sexual activity should be leading towards intercourse. So I think just these really subtle assumptions that are so woven into the fabric of our society that it becomes hard to almost like tease out and to realize like, oh, that's like a belief that I absorbed, that I integrated at some point that maybe I'm not actually really on board with.
It makes me think of two things. First of all, you let off by, it makes you think of freedom. Right. Mm-hmm. So any sort of limiting belief cuts off our freedom, mm-hmm. like if it has to be a certain way. Yeah. But it also strikes me that for a lot of people, they might be in a heterosexual relationship, focused on intercourse and orgasm, and maybe aren't experiencing that as negative. Right. Like they're chugging along. They're thinking this is all fine. People don't necessarily see the burden of that, or the limitingness of that, or the lack of freedom. Like they may not think that's a problem right now, mm-hmm. unless the day comes when it no longer works that way. Right? Sex changes and they can't do it the way they did, and then maybe they realize how limiting it is.
And that's a really interesting point, because part of me feels like, who am I to say that you're not doing it right, or that you're being sex negative? It's like, if you're fine with it, then it's like, cool, great, more power to you. But I think just it reminds me almost of like informed consent. It's like, let's be informed and then kind of decide like what actually feels good and what we're okay with.
Yeah. Because if we describe, oh wait, there's all these other options or other ways you could think about it, and they say that's cool, but we're good, then I don't think there's a problem. But it might be that they realize, oh wait, there's more. Like we don't have to be quite so narrow.
Yeah. And then one of the other areas where I thought about it in, you actually mentioned on your website, I saw you had like a little guide for couples to communicate about sex. I think that's a huge area where it comes into play, and something that has been kind of like so interesting for me as a sex therapist, seeing how many people come in and feel comfortable talking to me about sex and are pretty open, and here's what I like, here's what I don't like, here's what I'm like not comfortable with about myself, but want to be more comfortable. And then when we get to the part about, okay, and have you mentioned this to your partner? No.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. And then when I think about like, what are the forces behind that? Like, what are the reasons why people are not mentioning it to their partner? I have to think that like fear of judgment and rejection are going to be up there. Those kind of integrated ideas of, I should be a certain way, or maybe I should be attracted to people of the same gender, or I shouldn't be attracted to trans or non-binary people, or I should be performing a certain way in the bedroom, or kind of romantic sex is okay, but kinky sex is not, mm-hmm. that kind of thing, where it's like, how much of myself do I want to share? How vulnerable do I want to be? But then at the same time feeling kind of stuck, that lack of freedom if they can't be transparent and open with their partners.
Yeah, it's almost like any struggle to communicate about this stuff or to be open would have to be rooted in, it seems to me, in some sort of sex negativity.
That's
right? Like if you really embraced everything and everything was equally cool, then there'd be nothing to hold back, right? Like some fear of sex negativity, whether it's your own or it's something you're aware of in your partner or the culture or something, right? Would be having this impact.
Right. Like I'm very into mindfulness. And so and I'm a pet owner, as you can see my cat in the video, but, I think about animals sometimes and I'm like, are animals self-conscious? Do they think the way they have sex is weird? It's like, no, because they haven't been socialized. Like no one told them they should feel ashamed. And so they don't.
True. But I also think human sex is different because it's not just fornication or mating, right?
True.
We're having, we've got access to an intimacy that is so much different. And I think with that, hand in hand with that capacity for intimacy or this larger experience that involves the prefrontal cortex, right, comes where that negativity can creep in. Like it's, it seems to me it's like it's in the same part of the brain or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. You're right. There's just different potential with human sex for self-consciousness and anxiety and kind of getting out of the moment. But also, I think for sort of like a really cool transcendent experience and being very present or even in like a flow state. So,
right.
Yeah,
so it's it's like two sides of the same coin almost, or,
Right. It's like, it's not easy being human, but there's some benefits too.
Double-edged sword. That's the metaphor. Double-edged sword. You got this wonderful potential and it can totally mess us up and get us all up in our head. So what are some of the sex negative experiences or mindsets or whatever that you see that people bring into your practice that are talking about that's getting in their way? Like how does this show up?
Yeah. It's a little different for everyone. Some of the things that people mention is not feeling comfortable with their sexual orientation. That's definitely one. I see that a lot with male bisexuality. I kind of have a theory that even the research studies seem to think that, men are pretty much gay or straight. There's not a lot of bisexuality happening. Whereas, women, there's, a lot in the middle happening. And I think just my personal experience is like, I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
So I see that. I see a lot of discomfort with, hey, like I like women. And so it's easy to kind of just focus on that. But I have this unexplored part of myself. And sometimes it's maybe a religious upbringing that kind of teaches people that, it's not okay not to be straight. And so sort of the fear or the anticipatory anxiety of, well, I could never like come out to my family or like they have kind of super strict beliefs or like, this is not going to be okay. It's like, again, that like, I'm going to be rejected.
Yeah.
So I see that quite a bit. A lot of performance anxiety and sometimes some erectile dysfunction with that. And in that case, it's the more like, it's mostly for men, I should be, or penis owners, I should say. So people who feel like I should be performing a certain way, people who are socialized, as males, and, I should be orgasming or I should be able to have like a short period in between orgasming and, bounce right back. So there's a lot of judgment around that. And then I think people who have been criticized for their sexuality, who have had partners who have not been understanding, who have been judgmental when they've opened up about orientation or sexual interests. So yeah, I feel like there's quite the gamut.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of some of what you touched on, like erotic conflict, right? Something turns me on, but I'm not comfortable to share it with you, or whether I've gotten criticized with a past partner or my current one, or or it's just in my head. I haven't expressed it yet, but I'm worried. I've actually had a number of people too, just uncomfortable, not even just talking to their partner, but just with their own eroticism, their own, whether it's a fetish or, something that's a real turn on, and it seems really unexplainable to them. They don't understand it. They feel bad about it. This shouldn't turn me on, but it does. And, like similar to sexual orientation, I guess, the kinds of things that arouse us.
Right. Where it's just kind of
a lot of negativity.
I know. And I think our culture is starting to open up a bit. I feel there's been some more shows on Netflix even. I kind of not love Netflix in that way. I feel like they're a little more like cutting edge with what's happening.
Or something, yeah.
A little more groundbreaking. But I was like, oh, there's kind of a few shows that are featuring some like BDSM stuff, and that sort of diversity of our expression of sexuality is okay and being normalized. And my cousin even used the phrase, kink shaming. She's like, oh yeah, don't kink shame. One of her friends was like, oh yeah, don't kink shame me. I was like, oh, I like that this is like a phrase that's being tossed around now. So so it's interesting.
It is. And I, again, I don't know if this is counter to what people tend, so much about sex positive is about, expansive sexuality. So we are into kink or whatever, but even for just basic vanilla heterosexual sex, I worked with tons of people with negativity around that. And I suppose a fair amount of it has, certain proportion has been religious based, the religious training they got, but some of it's just family of origin or culture,
Definitely.
And so many people show up in my office who were raised all the way up to when they got married, potentially, to think sex is bad, avoid this, it's dangerous, whatever the messaging was. And then somehow, miraculously, on their wedding night, they're supposed to turn on a dime, and feel good about this. And they can't, right? Like, so those messages are so embedded.
Yes. And I've heard that from clients too, where it's kind of like, it's like, how do I flip that switch where it's like, I'm married now, it's okay.
Right.
But it's like, how do I, all of a sudden I'm supposed to set it free when I've been thinking like, oh, this is bad, avoid this. And if you do it, don't tell anyone. It should be a shameful secret.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's difficult. So I think that's part of our jobs basically, is to help people kind of undo some of the messaging that's not working for them.
Okay, we're going to just take a short little break here, and I want to let you know about Intimacy with Ease, the method that helps otherwise happy couples create a sex life that is fun, easy, light for both people. So if you are an otherwise happy couple, if sex is the elephant in the room or sex is the little bit of the challenge for you guys, you may want to check this out. You can go to intimacywithease.com and you'll see information there. You'll see short videos. You'll have access to a full webinar about it. All kinds of information to let you know if this would be the right thing for you. Do you see some sort of difference between what you think of as sex negativity and the effects of trauma? Because, of course, anybody who's had sexual trauma, not everybody, but like plenty of people that have had sexual trauma have some residual impacts of that. Maybe it's, affects their sense of freedom sexually, to some degree, unless it gets dealt with or something. There's a process for people in that, right? But do you lump that in with sex negativity, or do you think of that separately?
Absolutely not. Okay. Totally separate. I can see how it maybe would have some of the same effects.
Yeah. But
it seems like the sort of the energy of it or the underlying mechanisms feel very different, because I've definitely had clients with trauma histories that are very sex positive. So I definitely don't think it has to be one and the same. But in that case, it might be worth exploring boundaries, because part of what I think is sex positive is like doing what feels good for you. So if that is super, vanilla, following sort of the normative, whatever, hey, cool, do what works for you. But no, you have the freedom to choose. And if that's what you choose, cool. And so I think of that, where it's like if someone is dealing with trauma and maybe they're just at a point of like feeling comfortable with touch again, and that's enough.
Yeah.
Maybe they're at a point of, having sex regularly and that feels okay, but maybe certain conditions need to be met, or a certain partner that feels really emotionally safe.
Yeah. Yeah. It does seem to me that some trauma survivors have internalized some shame or negativity. Like, there can be some negative messaging that can go along with that. Not even necessarily expressly told to them, but the way that they integrate those experiences. So it seems like there's, I don't know if I'd even call it an overlap, but I think there's some parallelism that happens maybe between these.
I know. Now you have me curious about this.
Yeah, no, I'm totally asking you questions just like, oh.
I know. I'm like, well, what do
stream
you
of
think, Jessica?
consciousness, Yeah, I don't know quite what to make of that. It does seem to me like that might be a way to pick up some sex negativity. Certainly some lack of freedom that might need to be overcome, from a different cause than religious training or, the media messages that we might swallow. But
yeah, same.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of brings up a good point of consent, because I mean, that was something else that I thought about when I was thinking about sex positivity versus sex negativity. It's sort of our journey as a culture with consent. And I'm someone who's gone on a lot of dates over the years. So it's been interesting. It's like experiencing a variety where some people are very sort of aggressive, making a move and feel like, and other people are like asking verbally and slower. And so there's a whole gamut with that. And so I'm really curious, like, where our culture will go with that, because I do think that lack of sort of enthusiastic consent does contribute to sex negativity and trauma, obviously. If people are not feeling safe, or even in more subtle ways, if people are feeling like, oh, I don't really want to, but I probably shouldn't say yes. Or like, oh, maybe this person won't like me if I don't say yes.
Yeah, if we're not meeting someone else's expectations somehow, if we're doing something because of that fear, then that's not fully chosen. I guess I would say, right? It's not exactly non-consensual,
so I think that's part of the freedom
but
too.
It's not like enthusiastic. Yeah.
Right. So it's like part of the freedom is saying no.
Yeah.
It's just that people can feel free to do that. And if the no can be respected and not taken as like a personal rejection necessarily.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'll have to make like a meme of this or social media or something, but like no is a really foundational part of sex positivity. Right?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've talked about the importance of no in therapy a lot, about you can't really have a yes if you don't have a no, and how we should celebrate no and all this stuff. But I haven't lined it up before exactly. Being sex positive is going to involve knowing your boundaries, right? And being able to take care of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think kind of, the more people can get educated, which actually reminds me of another thing about sex negativity, is sex education in schools.
Yeah.
Is like, whoa, that's such a long way to go still.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I did the University of Michigan sexual health certificate program, and I did the education track as well. And so we learned about how many, and I'm not going to remember the number accurately, but I'm sure people can look this up, how many states require medically accurate sex ed. And I mean, it was definitely less than half.
Wow.
Less than half of the states are requiring medically accurate information. And it's like, it's like, it makes your brain want to explode. Like, how do we even begin to be sex positive when we're not even starting with accuracy?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think even that, like, let's have honest discussions. I think honesty is a big part of sex positivity.
So I was going to save this to the end, but let's dive in, and then we'll come back to working with like clients or specific people about sex positivity. But you're singing to the choir here. It breaks my heart the way sex ed is treated, the way our culture treats sex. I said this in doing some of the video work I'm doing. I was like, I can't use the word sex in a video if I'm going to use it in an advertisement on Facebook, right?
Yes.
That's just a symptom of where our culture has gone with this. What are your thoughts about how we, not just you and I as sex therapists, but we as all the listeners here, how do we change this in our culture, do you think, to move
I'm like
towards...
so glad you brought up this topic. I was recently also censored by Facebook. Yeah, I think it's like shifting our perspective as like, ooh, sex is kind of bad. We don't want children to like hear stuff about sex that's going to like damage them, to sex is positive. Sex is part of who we are. So we can choose to fight that and resist that, or we can choose to accept it and embrace it. And we can teach children at a developmentally appropriate level. And there are curriculums out there for these things. There are amazing educators, like my friend Wendy Sellers. She's called the Puberty Lady, who creates awesome sex positive curriculums for kids. So I think just starting to think about how can we do this instead of like, ooh, this is scary, let's just push it away and avoid it. So that's kind of my thought on that, is just
you think
making it okay to talk.
Yeah. So it seems to me that maybe the most powerful thing anybody with children can do is to change that narrative for their own children, right? Like start at home and create a more sex positive, open, free environment around it, even if it's not what you were raised with. You can give your kids something better, right?
Yeah, especially.
Other thoughts about how people might get involved, either if they aren't parents or if they want to go beyond that? Like how does...
that's interesting. I think, I'm so into like mindfulness stuff. And so I think so much of it is like, when we remove the stories of our culture and we just have direct experiences, noticing like what feels right, what sort of feels like integrity and alignment for us. Because that might be very different than what your family or your culture or your religion taught you. So starting to kind of do some of that work, whether it's alone or with a therapist or through a mindfulness class or whatever kind of personal development people are into. I think that's a really important place to start, is like realizing like what are some of our own biases. And it's like, I call it sex school. I feel like I went to sex school and I still have biases, and I still catch myself at moments. So, I mean, I think that just shows like we probably all can kind of keep doing that work. And then I think being a safe space for other people. So I think especially once we've done our own work, I think that helps us to be a safe space for other people, whether it's, kids who are curious and asking questions, or if it's friends who are like, oh, hey, I'm having this, issue in my marriage or a dating situation, or there's something I'm wanting to explore, but I don't know if it's weird, So just
and that makes me think too, is a safe space for our partner. So if they reveal something about what they're erotic or what they're interested in or not interested in or whatever, that we can welcome that, right? That would be part of it.
And that's so huge, because another thing I like from the kink community is this phrase, "Don't yuck my yum."
Yeah.
I just like love that phrase, because people are into some stuff that you might think is like, whoa, it's pretty out there, and that's okay. Like, you don't have to be into it. It might be like, oh, that's creepy or that's weird or whatever, but maybe just don't say that. Because just remember that even if something seems really out there or advanced or whatever you want to call it, that's still vulnerable for that person to share. And especially when you're their partner, like you're saying, that's meeting that with kindness. And even if it's like, hey, you know what? Like, I don't know much about that, but I'm open to learning more, or that's not something I've ever really thought of or been interested in, but let's discuss it. Just, I think any degree of openness can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. And I even think, even if what you get to is, that is just not for me, but no problem that that's what you're into. Like, no judgment, no.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you do not have to be into it to be a safe place to talk about it.
Right. Right. All right. So what else would you say about how you help people? I mean, let's say there's people listening. I think odds are some of the people listening have come into their adulthood with some sex negativity from some place or another, right? Like, what did they do?
Probably. I think we all have.
What are the ways to start to overcome that negativity, to replace it with positivity, and get themselves that freedom?
Absolutely. And I think one of the other ways we can do that is to be conscious of the media we're consuming. And again, I would say kind of tune in and notice, like, how does it make you feel? So if you're watching porn that doesn't make you feel very good, okay, maybe switch it up. If you are watching TV shows that, there was one that I watched recently, Normal People, and it really kind of bothered me on a kink level. I felt like it was a very kink shaming show, which I've heard in other articles and from other people. And so then I was like, okay, I'm going to be done watching this show now. So we can kind of like vote with our time, vote with our eyeballs. It's like, what are you viewing on Instagram? There's a lot of sex positive accounts to follow too. So I do this with my clients with like body image stuff. Be very mindful of like, how are you feeling about yourself as you're scrolling through your social media, and be ruthless. Like, anything we're like, oh, not feeling good. Unfollow, unsubscribe, do whatever you have to do. And then consciously seek out, what are some sex positive accounts that I can follow?
Yeah.
What are some shows I can watch that are inclusive and sex positive?
Right. And then what are your thoughts on how a sex therapist might help somebody? Like, when somebody might want to go see somebody about some of this stuff versus just tackle it on their own?
I mean, I'm so pro therapy.
Right. So what are your Your particular thoughts on how a sex therapist might help somebody who's come in with a lot of sex negativity.
Yeah. So step one, everyone should see a sex therapist. But no, I think it's helpful depending on how you like to learn too. So, if you're someone who's pretty verbal, and likes to talk things out, so I kind of refer to myself as being kind of a social learner. So I like having a teacher or a coach or a therapist. I think for me, it helps me feel kind of witnessed when I'm on the client side. And what I see with my clients is kind of the same thing. It's like there's a sense of feeling witnessed, feeling accepted. I think that's really huge is like, any decent sex therapist is not going to reject you if you're a consenting adult with other consenting adults. And so just maybe knowing, I think that's when it can be really helpful if you need to kind of have that experience of, being accepted and embraced regardless of what's going on with you.
Yeah. That's actually a really important, at this moment, it seems to me an important place, a distinction between a certified sex therapist, as we are, who have gone
not
through,
yet.
Okay, but in the process, right, who have gone through the training and the self-reflection and evaluation to understand where our biases are and reflect versus the people that never do that training and yet say they're sex therapists because they are allowed to generally, who maybe are imposing their belief systems on people.
That pains me so much.
Right. So that's an important thing. I just want to throw in there for people listening to find a certified sex therapist or somebody working towards their certification so that you're getting somebody who's challenged their thinking and ideas. So you aren't going to be judged or shamed or talked out of or whatever, what's going on for you.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I'm sure there are some great other therapists out there who just naturally are kind of open-minded and not judgmental and have done a lot of their own work. But true, when you go to a therapist who has specified training, like we have to do what is it called? The SAR? I forget what the SAR stands for.
Sexual attitude reassessment, right?
Thank you.
We have to challenge our edges there. Yeah.
Right. Where it's like we learn about different groups of people and different cultures within that and how those different people and cultures relate to sexuality, and we notice our own reactions. And so, we're kind of, our minds are opened even more than they were going in. And I think that's the number one thing is like having a safe space where like, I can trust that this person is going to be welcoming and accepting to me. And then I think education, and that's been something clients have said directly to me where it's kind of like, I never really learned any of these things. And I'm kind of like, well, schools still aren't teaching them accurately. So there's that. But so, some education about, what's okay, what's not, what are resources, support groups, talking through things, learning how to communicate with partners. And again, I think that one is just so huge for pretty much everyone I work with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. So where can people find you? Learn a little bit more about you.
Thank you for asking. My website is just heathershannon.co, and I am going to be making a little page for this podcast interview. So it'll be heathershannon.co/better sex. And so I'll put a little sex positivity quiz on there and then a video about how do you overcome sexual shame and stigma, if that's something that you're kind of doing.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that link ends up in the show notes too, so people won't have to write that down or remember it while they're driving or something. So
right, exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you, Jessa. This was awesome. I appreciate being here.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.